Punishment Parade in Abysmal with their horse guards. Royal Guard, King's Guard, Horse, London. Thick clouds hung low over the rooftops, heavy with rain that had been falling since the early hours of the morning. The streets, usually filled with the chatter of merchants and the clatter of carriage wheels, were quiet except for the constant drum of water hitting cobblestones. Puddles had formed in every uneven corner, reflecting the lanterns and signs of shops, making the city shimmer in a strange, dull light. Even the usual seagulls and pigeons seemed to sense the heaviness in the air, their cries muffled, their wings tucked tightly as they hopped cautiously on wet rooftops. In the heart of the city, the stables of the horse guards were bustling. Horses, large and strong, stamped their hooves impatiently, their breath steaming in the cold, damp air. Stable hands moved quickly, wet boots splashing in shallow puddles, brushing down the animals and checking the harnesses and saddles. The smell of wet hay and leather mixed with the crisp, rainy air. The soldiers, usually proud and calm, moved with a nervous urgency. They were preparing for an event that no one in the city would forget, a parade that was more than just a show of power. This was a punishment parade, and it carried the weight of both discipline and humiliation. Captain Hargreaves, a tall, stern man with graying hair, walked among the horses, inspecting the guards and their mounts. He ran his hands over the wet leather of the saddles and the steel of the stirrups, making sure everything was perfect. "No mistakes," he muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the damp faces of the men. "Not today." Even the slightest error during a parade like this could be noticed by the king or by the crowd, and today the eyes of London would be watching. Outside the stables, the streets were beginning to fill, though not with the usual crowd of merchants and street performers. Today, people came out with umbrellas, cloaks, and scarves, moving carefully through the rain to see the parade. Some were curious, others whispered about the disgraced officer who would be the center of the procession. No one knew exactly what he had done wrong. Rumors were wild, ranging from a failed mission to disobedience, but everyone knew that today he would face public punishment. The city seemed to hold its breath, as if it were waiting to see how dignity, authority, and shame would play out under the gray, weeping sky. Inside the palace grounds, the royal guard assembled. They stood in rigid lines, boots polished until they shone even in the dim light of the rainy morning. Their red coats were darkened by the wet, their white gloves streaked with mud. The horses they would ride were already harnessed, their coats sleek but damp, their eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and unease. The guards whispered little, their discipline leaving no room for conversation, but there was tension in the air, like the low hum before a storm. Sergeant Thompson, who had served in the King's Guard for over 20 years, walked up and down the line, checking every detail. "Keep your backs straight, keep your heads up, eyes forward. Remember, you are the image of the crown itself," he instructed in a voice firm enough to cut through the drizzle. The men nodded silently, though their faces betrayed the same nervous energy that gripped everyone this morning. Today was not just a parade. It was a test of control, endurance, and the ability to maintain composure in the face of humiliation. Meanwhile, the officer who was to be punished prepared himself. He sat on his horse in the quiet corner of the barracks, head bowed and hands gripping the reins tightly. His uniform, once crisp and proud, was damp and clinging uncomfortably to his body. His mind raced with the events that had led him here. He had been brave in battle, careful in duty, yet a single mistake, or perhaps the judgment of others, had brought him to this point. Today, he would ride not as a symbol of pride but as an example of discipline. He could hear the faint sound of hoofbeats and voices from the stables and streets beyond, and every sound reminded him of the eyes that would soon follow his every move. The rain began to fall harder, drumming on the roofs and streets with a steady, insistent rhythm. Water ran in small rivers along the edges of the cobblestones, and the wind carried cold gusts that cut through the soldiers' coats. Even the horses seemed uneasy, shaking their heads and stamping their hooves. A sense of drama filled the air, as though the city itself understood the weight of what was about to happen. The parade would not be simply a display. It would be a performance set against the fury of the weather, each moment magnified by mud, rain, and the sounds of a city holding its breath. At the appointed hour, drums began to beat in the distance, muffled by the rain but steady and clear. It was the signal. The horse guards mounted their horses, moving in practiced precision despite the slippery ground. Their coats glistened with raindrops, their breath steaming as they exhaled. The officer at the center felt his heart pound in time with the rhythm of the drums. The royal guard flanked him, their expressions unreadable, their posture perfect, even as the wind tore at their banners and cloaks. The people of London began to gather in greater numbers, lining the streets under dripping awnings, leaning out of windows, and huddling beneath umbrellas. They were silent at first, as if the gravity of the moment demanded it. Children peeked from behind parents' skirts, and old men shook their heads, remembering other punishments and parades from years gone by. The air smelled of wet stone, horses, and leather, and the gray light made every figure appear as part of a living painting, somber, tense, and full of anticipation. Captain Hargreaves raised his sword in a small, precise salute. The officer shifted uneasily on his horse, knowing that there was no turning back. Every guard knew their role perfectly, every step measured. The streets, once ordinary and busy, had become the stage for a story of authority and consequence. Even the rain seemed to bend around the parade, falling in sheets that made the uniforms heavy, the horses slippery, and every movement more difficult, more dramatic. For a moment, time itself seemed to slow. The officer could hear the quiet slosh of water beneath hooves, the faint clatter of armor, and the distant murmur of the gathered crowd. He thought of the choices that had led him here, the expectations of his superiors, and the eyes of London upon him. The weight of public scrutiny pressed down as heavily as the sky above. Yet, despite the fear, there was a strange clarity in his mind. He would endure. He would ride through this storm not as a defeated man, but as someone who faced consequence with courage. The parade had not yet moved, but already the tension was nearly unbearable. The city seemed to hold its breath, the wind gusting as if to punctuate the moment. Captain Hargreaves signaled again, and the horses shifted, stamping, snorting, ready to move. The officer adjusted his grip on the reins, straightened his back as best he could, and drew in a deep breath. The royal guard flanked him like shadows in red, and the horse guards waited with that perfect stillness that comes from years of discipline. Then, as if the city had waited too long, the first step forward was taken. The officer's horse moved into motion, slipping slightly on the wet cobblestones but recovering with a proud shake of its head. Around him the parade began, the drums growing louder, the hooves striking water and stone with a resonant rhythm. The rain fell harder, drenching the crowd and participants alike, but it did not diminish the spectacle. Instead, it made every movement more visible, every drop of water a sparkling reminder of the harshness of both weather and consequence. As the parade prepared to leave the palace gates, the officer caught a glimpse of faces in the crowd, some curious, some sympathetic, some harsh. He knew that today would be remembered, not only for his punishment, but for the resilience of those who carried duty and discipline in their hearts. The city of London, gray and wet, was ready to witness a story that would be told again and again, a story of courage, shame, authority, and endurance, all under the relentless drum of rain. The moment hung in the air, heavy, electric, and full of anticipation. Every horse, every guard, every raindrop seemed to understand the weight of what was about to begin. The officer straightened, the guards aligned, and the horse guards' horses snorted in readiness. The first step had been taken, and with it, The punishment parade in abysmal weather had begun. The rain showed no sign of stopping as the punishment parade slowly moved out of the palace gates. Horses' hooves clattered against the wet cobblestones, sending splashes of water in every direction. Their hooves seemed to echo through the streets, a constant rhythm that matched the heavy drums accompanying the parade. The officer rode in the center, flanked by the royal guard, their faces stern and unmoving despite the cold and wet. The horse guards rode alongside, their horses large and powerful, their armor catching flashes of dim light through the rain. The streets of London had become a river of people. Citizens huddled beneath umbrellas, thick coats, and any shelter they could find. Yet even as they tried to stay dry, their curiosity drew them closer. Some children peered out from behind their parents' legs, eyes wide, not fully understanding the severity of what they were witnessing, but drawn by the horses and the shining armor. Older citizens whispered to each other, shaking their heads, remembering stories of past punishments and parades. The air smelled of wet leather, cold stone, and the faint smoke of distant chimneys, a mixture of the city's dampness and its life. The officer felt every eye upon him. Some looked with curiosity, some with disdain, and a few with a glimmer of sympathy. He could feel their stares piercing through him, each gaze a reminder that this parade was not merely a formal procession. It was a lesson for everyone to see. He gripped the reins tightly, feeling the damp leather bite into his palms, and tried to keep his mind focused. One wrong movement, one faltering step, and the whispers would turn into judgment. He looked down at his horse, feeling its strength beneath him, its patience and determination to move forward through the rain and mud. For a brief moment, he found a strange comfort in that trust between horse and rider. The royal guard kept their positions perfectly aligned, moving in unison with the rhythm of the drums. Their red coats, darkened by the rain, formed a strong, continuous line on either side of the officer. Their faces showed no emotion, but their eyes were sharp and alert, constantly scanning for any sign of disorder. The discipline was remarkable. Even the young guards, recently assigned, moved as if they had been trained for years to maintain this unbroken formation. Every movement of the parade was calculated, precise, and deliberate, and yet it was also a dance with the weather itself. The rain made the ground slippery, and the wind tore at the banners they carried, threatening to throw them off balance. Despite the gloom and cold, the crowd's interest never waned. People pressed closer to the parade route, careful not to slip in the puddles. Merchants had abandoned their stalls for the morning, leaving the streets quiet except for the parade and the sound of rain. Some held up umbrellas, others pulled hoods over their heads, and a few braved the storm without any protection at all, wanting to see every detail. They wanted to witness the punishment, yes, but they also wanted to see courage, how the officer would carry himself, how the guards would maintain their precision, how the city itself would hold its breath under the storm. The officer's mind was full of thoughts, some bitter, some calm. He remembered the day that had led him to this moment, the mistake that had marked him for public scrutiny. He thought of his comrades, the battles fought, the orders followed, and the single moment that had changed everything. Now he could only endure. The crowd might judge him harshly, the guards might watch his every step, and the king's eyes might be upon him later, but there was nothing left to do except to ride forward with dignity. He drew a slow, steady breath and tried to feel the rhythm of the parade, letting it guide him through the slippery streets. The horse guards' horses were magnificent even in the rain. Their coats were darkened by water, muscles rippling under tension as they moved, heads high and proud. They seemed to sense the importance of the parade, stepping carefully, alert to both their riders and the crowd. Occasionally, a horse would stamp or snort, breaking the silence for a moment, but the guards quickly restored order, calming their mounts and keeping the formation intact. Each movement was a display of power and discipline, a reminder that the crown commanded obedience from both man and animal. As the parade moved through the main streets, the officer noticed the mixture of reactions from the people. Some whispered to each other, pointing at the officer or murmuring about what had brought him here. Others simply stared, unable to look away, caught by the strange beauty of the scene, the precision of the guards, the power of the horses, the glint of wet armor, and the unrelenting gray sky above. He realized that while this parade was meant to punish, it had also become something else, a performance of endurance, courage, and human strength under pressure. The drums grew louder as the parade reached the wider square near the river. The sound seemed to echo off the wet buildings, amplifying the tension. The officer's horse slipped slightly on the slick cobblestones, and for a brief moment he felt a jolt of panic. But the horse quickly recovered, stepping carefully, and he leaned forward slightly, steadying his balance. Around him, the royal guard maintained perfect alignment, their horses moving as one, while the horse guards flanked them, watching for any disturbance. The officer realized that in this moment he was not just a man being punished. He was part of a living story, a scene unfolding in the city itself. The wind began to pick up, carrying raindrops sideways and tearing at the banners held by the guards. The officer's cloak, heavy with water, clung to his back, making it difficult to move freely. His gloves were soaked, and his fingers stiffened as he gripped the reins. Yet, through all the discomfort, he held his head high, focusing on the rhythm of the horses and the parade. Each step forward was a statement, each careful maneuver a quiet declaration that he would not falter completely, even under public scrutiny and abysmal weather. At the edges of the parade, some onlookers began to feel a strange mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing justice, or what they believed to be justice, carried out, but there was also empathy for the officer. Here was a man exposed to judgment in front of the entire city, yet maintaining composure, relying on his training, his horse, and his own inner strength. A few mothers whispered to their children, teaching them that courage could appear even in shame, that dignity could endure even when consequences were harsh. The officer passed familiar landmarks, the old stone buildings glistening with rain, the river reflecting the gray sky, and the parade's moving lights. Every sound seemed amplified, the clatter of hooves, the distant murmur of the crowd, the soft hiss of rain on stone. It was as if the city itself had paused, watching him, waiting for the next step. And in that stillness, he found a small but vital reassurance. Though he was being punished, though the crowd's eyes were heavy with expectation, he could control only his own actions, his own posture, his own courage. Time seemed to stretch as the parade continued. The officer could feel the weight of every movement, every step of the horses, every glance from the guards beside him. The royal guard never faltered, their disciplined formation unwavering, providing a stark contrast to the chaos of the weather. The horse guards, powerful and alert, moved with precision, each horse and rider a testament to strength and training. And in the center, the officer moved forward, riding through rain, mud, and judgment, aware that every moment was being observed and remembered. As the parade reached the bridge over the river, the officer noticed the wind blowing harder. The rain stung his face, and water dripped down from his hat and cloak. Yet the sight of the city, stretching along the riverbanks, gave him a strange sense of connection. He was part of something larger than himself, a story of discipline, authority, and endurance played out in front of thousands. Each careful step forward was both punishment and proof that he could survive it, that he could endure public scrutiny without losing composure. Finally, the parade began to turn back toward the main square, the rhythm of the drums matching the officer's steady breathing. His horse's hooves struck the wet stones with a resonant sound, each step a reminder that he was still moving forward, still holding his place in the procession. The royal guard remained perfectly aligned, their red coats bright against the gray backdrop, and the horse guards continued their flanking positions, alert and imposing. The officer felt a mixture of relief and tension, knowing that the first stage of the parade had passed, but also aware that the day's trials were far from over. By the time the parade began to slow near the palace gates again, the officer had settled into a rhythm. The rain continued to fall, but he had become accustomed to its weight and sound. The crowd, now larger as more people had come out, watched silently, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and quiet admiration. The officer understood that this parade was more than punishment. It was a test of endurance, courage, and resilience. And though he was the center of attention, he was not alone. The guards, the horses, and even the city itself were participants in this story, each playing a role in a moment that would be remembered long after the rain had stopped. The rain had turned sharper, slicing across the faces of both guards and spectators. What had been a steady drizzle now fell in torrents, soaking the soldiers, drenching the cloaks of the officer, and turning the cobblestones into a slick, glistening river. London's streets, already narrow and twisting, became difficult to navigate. Water flowed quickly along gutters, pooling in low spots and splashing against horses' hooves as they marched forward with careful, deliberate steps. The officer gripped the reins tightly, feeling the wet leather stiffen in his hands, but he refused to show any sign of fear or hesitation. The parade had reached one of the city's oldest squares, where buildings leaned slightly over the street, their stone facades dark with rain. The crowd pressed close, umbrellas opening and closing in a strange, chaotic rhythm as people jockeyed for better views. Faces appeared pale and wet, eyes wide with fascination or concern, while children pointed at the officer and his guards with excitement, not fully understanding the gravity of the spectacle but drawn by the horses and shining armor. Elderly citizens whispered quietly to one another, recalling punishments they had witnessed long ago and commenting on the bravery or misfortune of the man at the center. The officer's mind was a swirl of memories and emotions. He remembered the moment that had led him here, the mistake that had been blown out of proportion, the judgment of his superiors, the whispers of betrayal among his fellow soldiers. Yet he also remembered training, loyalty, and the many times he had faced danger without hesitation. This parade, he realized, was both punishment and public examination. Every movement, every expression would be scrutinized. And though the rain poured down, he drew a steadying breath, focusing on the rhythm of his horse and the movements of the guards around him. The royal guard maintained perfect formation, their red coats darkened and heavy with water. Each guard's posture was flawless, shoulders squared, eyes forward, hands firm on their weapons. Despite the cold and wet, their discipline never faltered. The officer glanced at them as they moved, noting the strength in their synchronized movements. Even the young guards, who had been nervous at the beginning, now moved with quiet confidence. They were the backbone of the parade, silent witnesses to the punishment being carried out, and their composure lent him a small sense of reassurance. The horse guards flanked the officer like sentinels. Their horses, magnificent creatures, moved carefully through the rain-slick streets, muscles tensed, ears alert. Occasionally, a horse stamped its hoof or shook its head, trying to rid itself of water, but the riders quickly corrected any signs of disorder. The officer found a strange comfort in watching them. There was an unspoken understanding between horse and rider, a silent bond that allowed both to endure harsh conditions without faltering. He leaned slightly forward in the saddle, feeling the strength beneath him, and allowed himself a small moment of trust in his horse's instincts. The wind picked up suddenly, swirling rain sideways and making the banners carried by the guards snap and flap violently. Some onlookers gasped as the fabric whipped through the air, while others pressed closer, eager not to miss a single detail. The officer's cloak clung uncomfortably to his body, and he could feel water dripping down his neck. But he held his posture, knowing that any sign of weakness would be noticed, remembered, and discussed by the crowd. Each step forward was not only a physical effort but a mental challenge, a test of patience, control, and endurance. As they reached a narrow street leading toward the marketplace, the parade slowed slightly. Horses' hooves slipped on the slick stones, and the officer felt a brief twinge of fear. A single misstep could have caused chaos in the formation, and the thought pressed heavily on his mind. Yet he leaned on the training ingrained in him, keeping his focus on steady breathing, even movement, and unbroken composure. The royal guard mirrored him in precision, their eyes scanning for any disturbance, while the horse guards adjusted their mounts, ensuring they stayed aligned and calm. The crowd pressed in closer, creating a tunnel through which the parade moved. People's faces were wet, their umbrellas dripping, yet they were completely absorbed in the spectacle. Some whispered theories about the officer's mistake. Others expressed quiet admiration for his ability to endure humiliation without showing fear. A few onlookers, moved by the scene, even muttered words of encouragement, though they were careful to remain unseen by the guards. The officer caught a glimpse of some of these expressions, small nods, faint smiles, eyes filled with empathy, and for a fleeting moment he felt a strange mixture of shame and pride. The drumbeats grew louder, reverberating off the wet buildings and mixing with the clatter of hooves. The sound seemed to fill the entire city, a reminder that the parade was both punishment and ceremony. Each beat of the drum marked another step forward, another test of endurance for the officer and the soldiers around him. Even the rain seemed to fall in rhythm with the drums, a relentless percussion that heightened the tension of the moment. He adjusted his posture slightly, allowing his horse to sense his determination, and moved forward with renewed focus. The officer's thoughts drifted briefly to his comrades, men who had served beside him in battle, who had shared danger and victories. Some had expressed regret at the decision to punish him publicly, while others remained silent, bound by the strict hierarchy of the guard. He wondered how they would perceive him now, riding through the streets of London, soaked to the bone, surrounded by disciplined guards and relentless spectators. Though he felt isolated in the center of attention, he also realized that he was part of something larger, an event that carried meaning beyond himself, a lesson for the city about obedience, courage, and consequence. The wind gusted again, stronger this time, and the officer's horse shied slightly, sensing the sudden movement in the air. He leaned forward, steadying the reins and speaking softly to the animal, feeling its muscles tense and release under him. Around him, the royal guard maintained their perfect line, unflinching, and the horse guards mirrored their movements, correcting any small disruptions immediately. The officer marveled at the discipline surrounding him, how training, experience, and sheer willpower could maintain order even in the face of chaos. It was a reminder that, while he was the subject of punishment, he was also a participant in a display of remarkable skill and coordination. As the parade approached a wider square near the river, the crowd became denser. People had abandoned umbrellas and cloaks, standing soaked in the rain to witness every detail. The officer could hear snippets of conversation, speculation, judgment, admiration, and he realized that the parade was not just about punishment, but about spectacle. It had become a story unfolding in real time, a narrative that the city would recount for years. Each careful step he took, each measured movement of his horse became part of that story, a testament to endurance and human resilience. The officer's cloak, heavy with water, hung like a wet curtain around him, but he refused to let it impede his movement or spirit. He adjusted his grip on the reins, feeling the strength and determination of his horse beneath him. The royal guard flanked him on either side, their faces set in stoic determination, while the horse guards kept a watchful eye on the perimeter. The wind carried the scent of wet stone leather and the river nearby, mingling with the faint aroma of food from market stalls abandoned earlier. Every sense was heightened: the sound of hooves, the feel of rain, the sight of the crowd, and the tension that permeated the air. For the officer, time seemed to stretch. The parade moved slowly, each step a challenge, each moment a test of focus and patience. He remembered his training, the countless drills, the hours spent preparing for moments just like this, though he had never imagined it under such relentless weather. He reminded himself that this was not merely punishment. It was a demonstration of control, discipline, and courage. Every motion he made, every expression he held, was being recorded in the minds of those who watched, shaping how he would be remembered. As the parade reached the bridge over the river, the officer felt a slight twinge of fear. The stones were slick, the river below roiling with rainwater, and the wind seemed determined to push against him. His horse's hooves slipped once, and he corrected quickly, feeling a surge of adrenaline. Around him, the royal guard maintained unbroken formation, and the horse guards adjusted their mounts with practiced precision. The crowd, now silent in anticipation, watched the procession as though it were a performance, holding its collective breath with each careful step. The officer realized that he was learning something in this moment. The parade, though intended as punishment, was also a test of endurance, courage, and humanity. Even in shame, even under the relentless rain, he could demonstrate strength. He could endure scrutiny, maintain composure, and move forward with dignity. And as he looked at the faces of the crowd, curious, judgmental, empathetic, he understood that this moment, though harsh, was also an opportunity to show that resilience and courage were possible even in the most difficult circumstances. As the parade slowly turned to return toward the main square, the officer felt the first hint of tiredness creeping into his muscles. His hands were stiff from holding the reins, his cloak heavy with water, and his body chilled despite his movement. Yet he continued, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat, guided by the rhythm of his horse, the discipline of the guards, and the unbroken gaze of London citizens. He understood now that the parade was not just a punishment. It was a lesson in endurance, humility, and strength. And in that realization he found a small, steady courage. The storm might rage, the streets might be slick and treacherous, the crowd might judge, and the punishment might sting, but he would endure. Each step forward, each movement through the rain, became a testament not only to discipline and obedience, but also to the quiet, powerful strength of a person who refused to falter completely. The rain had grown relentless, falling in thick sheets that pounded the cobblestones and blurred the edges of the streets. The wind, stronger now, tore at the banners carried by the royal guard, snapping them sharply and forcing the riders to lean into it. Even the horse guards, sturdy and disciplined, felt the chill and weight of the storm pressing against them. Yet the officer continued to ride at the center, his back straight, his hands steady on the reins, determined not to falter. Every sense was sharpened by the weather, the cold rain stinging his face, the muddy street slick beneath his horse's hooves, and the relentless gusts whipping his wet cloak around his body. The parade had reached the widest square in London, a place where crowds could gather on all sides. Citizens pressed forward despite the rain, some with umbrellas, some without, eager to witness the spectacle. The officer noticed the mixture of emotions on their faces: curiosity, judgment, sympathy, and in a few, quiet admiration. It struck him that this parade was no longer just punishment. It was a story unfolding in real time, and he was both the subject and a participant. Every movement, every careful adjustment of posture, every controlled step of the horse was part of the narrative, observed and remembered by everyone present. A sudden gust of wind tore across the square, catching the officer by surprise. His hat flew off, spinning in the air before landing in a puddle several feet away. The horse shied sharply at the unexpected movement, rocking slightly on its hooves. For a moment, the officer felt a jolt of fear. The crowd gasped, and whispers rippled through them, as if the single act of the hat flying off had magnified the tension. He leaned forward slightly, gripping the reins firmly, and spoke softly to the horse, coaxing it back to calm. The animal's ears flicked forward, muscles tensing and relaxing, sensing the subtle commands of its rider. The royal guard, flanking him on either side, remained a perfect wall of red, their eyes focused straight ahead, unblinking and disciplined. The horse guards adjusted their positions, subtly guiding their mounts to maintain the flow of the parade. The officer could see their precise movements, a silent reassurance that even in the chaos of weather and human error, order could be maintained. The incident, small as it was, reminded him that even minor disturbances could carry meaning in a moment like this. The crowd had noticed, the parade had shifted slightly, and yet discipline and endurance would win out if he continued to hold his composure. As the parade moved forward again, the officer felt the eyes of the city upon him more intensely than ever. He caught glimpses of children peeking through the umbrellas, elderly citizens holding their breath, and young men whispering amongst themselves. Everyone seemed to sense that this was more than punishment. It was a test of courage under pressure, a display of human endurance in the face of discomfort and public scrutiny. He adjusted his posture, lifted his chin slightly, and allowed a controlled, calm expression to show, signaling that he would not be broken by wind, rain, or embarrassment. The wind and rain made even the most simple movements difficult. Horses' hooves slipped occasionally on slick stones, the officer's cloak hung heavy and cold on his shoulders, and the banners of the royal guard whipped violently, threatening to throw off the alignment. Each step forward required complete focus and coordination, not just from him, but from every soldier and horse in the parade. The officer realized that this was the true test of endurance, not only physical but mental. Every gust of wind, every splash of water, every gasp of the crowd added a layer of complexity that required calm, precise action. The officer's mind drifted briefly to thoughts of his mistake, the reason he had been chosen for public punishment. He recalled the tension in the office when the king's decision was delivered, the whispered comments of fellow soldiers, and the moment he realized that he would have to endure humiliation openly in front of the city. Yet as the parade continued, he realized that the punishment was teaching him something far deeper than fear or shame. It was teaching resilience, self-control, and the quiet strength that comes from enduring adversity with dignity. Each careful step, each subtle correction of posture, was a lesson not just for him but for everyone observing. The square opened wider ahead, revealing the bridge over the river. The wind was strongest here, carrying sheets of rain diagonally across the parade. Horses snorted and shifted their weight, uneasy at the sudden force of nature. The officer tightened his grip on the reins, feeling the muscles of his arms and shoulders tense and release with each movement. The royal guard maintained their wall of red on either side, their faces calm, their discipline unbroken. The horse guards adjusted positions smoothly, each horse and rider responding to the subtle cues that maintained alignment. The officer realized that this parade, though punishment, had become a dance, a precise coordination of human and animal, of discipline and endurance, of order against chaos. The crowd on the bridge pressed close, their expressions tense. Some muttered quietly, impressed by the officer's calm under pressure. Others whispered speculations about what he had done to deserve this. Children pointed excitedly, fascinated by the horses and the colors of the uniforms, while adults studied the scene with a mixture of curiosity and reflection. The officer felt every gaze, every whisper, yet he focused solely on the next step, the next movement, and the rhythm of the parade. It was a test of endurance, but also a display of human capacity to maintain control in extreme circumstances. The officer's horse slipped slightly on the wet stones of the bridge, and he instinctively leaned forward, pressing his legs gently against the horse's sides. The animal recovered gracefully, stepping carefully to maintain balance. A few pedestrians gasped, and the guards subtly shifted to ensure that the parade's formation remained intact. The officer allowed himself a brief glance at the river below, brown and churning with rainwater. The scene reminded him that life was rarely smooth or predictable, yet resilience and attention could carry one through even the harshest conditions. A sudden cheer rose from the crowd on the far side of the bridge, and the officer realized that some citizens were beginning to recognize not only the severity of the punishment, but also the courage with which he endured it. Small signs of empathy appeared, nods, faint smiles, whispers of encouragement. Though the parade was meant to humiliate, the officer noticed that humanity had a way of appearing even in moments of judgment. It was a subtle, almost invisible support, yet it strengthened him, reminding him that endurance and dignity could inspire respect even in adversity. The parade began to turn toward the city square once more, the officer's body tired but his focus sharper than ever. The wind and rain had softened slightly, though the storm was far from over. His wet cloak clung to him, his boots squelched in the water, and the reins felt stiff and heavy in his hands. Yet with every step, he moved forward with determination, aware that he was carrying not just his own dignity, but the expectations of the guards around him and the silent judgment of the crowd. Every step, every controlled breath, every careful adjustment was a small victory over the storm and the humiliation. The officer began to notice subtle shifts in the crowd. Some faces showed quiet admiration, others a sense of understanding, and a few reflected regret for the circumstances that had brought him here. Even in the midst of punishment, there was a strange honor in endurance, a lesson that strength could appear quietly, without arrogance, in the face of public scrutiny. He felt a sense of calm determination settle over him. The punishment was still real, the rain still relentless, but he had begun to find a rhythm, a flow that allowed him to move forward without fear or hesitation. As the parade approached the city square, the officer noticed a moment of danger. A large puddle on the stones threatened to splash onto the spectators or cause a horse to slip. He adjusted his horse's path subtly, leaning forward and giving precise commands, and the animal responded flawlessly. Around him, the royal guard and horse guards mirrored the careful adjustments, maintaining the parade's order and control. It was a delicate balance. One wrong step, one slip, could disrupt the entire procession, but discipline, coordination, and experience carried them forward safely. The crowd, now fully engaged, seemed to realize that the parade was more than punishment. It had become a story of endurance, courage, and the subtle triumph of discipline over chaos. Children watched with wide eyes, adults whispered quietly, and even the guards felt the weight of the story they were a part of. The officer, soaked and exhausted, continued forward with calm determination. Each step of his horse, each beat of the drums, each careful movement became a part of a shared narrative, a moment that the city would remember long after the rain had stopped. By the time the parade slowed near the main square, the officer's muscles ached, his hands were stiff, and his cloak hung heavy from the rain. Yet he felt a quiet strength that had grown from enduring the storm. He had faced public scrutiny, harsh weather, and the tension of the parade with composure. Though the punishment was not over, he had begun to understand that resilience, courage, and dignity were not erased by hardship, they were revealed through it. And as he rode forward, flanked by disciplined guards and supported silently by the empathy of the crowd, he felt a sense of quiet triumph, a lesson learned not from victory, but from enduring with honor. The rain had begun to ease slightly as the parade approached the palace gates for its conclusion. Large drops still fell from the sky, but the torrent had lessened, leaving the streets glistening and reflective, almost like a mirror under the gray light. The officer, soaked to the bone, continued to ride with his head held high, feeling the strain in every muscle from hours of endurance. His cloak clung heavily to his body, his gloves were stiff and wet, and his boots squelched with each careful step of his horse. Yet despite the physical discomfort, a quiet sense of resolve had settled within him. The Royal Guard maintained perfect formation, their red coats now streaked with mud and rainwater. Each guard's face remained calm and composed, eyes fixed straight ahead, movements precise even after hours in harsh conditions. Their dedication and discipline were remarkable, and the officer could not help but feel a sense of gratitude for their steadfast presence. The horse guards flanked him, their horses powerful and steady, navigating the slick streets without faltering. Together, they formed a living barrier of strength, ensuring the parade ended with dignity and order intact. The crowd had grown thinner as the day progressed, but those who remained were the most dedicated, willing to endure the cold and rain to witness the conclusion of the punishment parade. Faces were wet from rain and emotion, some eyes wide in admiration, others thoughtful, and a few filled with quiet sympathy. Children clung to their parents' hands, fascinated by the horses and armor, while adults whispered in hushed tones, commenting on the courage they had observed. The officer noticed subtle nods and quiet murmurs of approval, small signs that his endurance had not gone unnoticed. As the parade moved through the final stretch, the officer reflected on the journey of the day. The punishment had been harsh, the rain unrelenting and the scrutiny intense, yet he had endured. Every step, every careful maneuver, every controlled movement of his horse had been a testament to his resilience. He had faced public shame, the judgment of the city, and the challenges of the storm, but he had not faltered. In that realization, there was a quiet victory, an understanding that true strength is often revealed in moments of difficulty rather than celebration. The officer's horse, tired but steady, navigated the final cobblestones with care. He adjusted his posture slightly, shifting his weight to ease the strain on both himself and the animal. The Royal Guard and horse guards mirrored his movements, their discipline unwavering even as fatigue set in. The city seemed to pause with them, the rain softening to a mist, the wind easing, and the streets reflecting the gray sky above. For a moment, the entire scene felt suspended, a quiet testament to endurance and courage in the face of adversity. The officer's thoughts returned to the people of London who had watched him throughout the day. He had felt their judgment, curiosity, and occasional sympathy. Their presence had been a silent force, pushing him to maintain composure, to ride with dignity, and to endure the punishment without breaking. He realized that the parade was not only about public correction, but also about the shared experience between the city and those who served it. It was a reminder that human endurance, discipline, and resilience are recognized and remembered, even by strangers in the rain. As the procession neared the palace gates, the officer felt the weight of the day's journey. His body was exhausted, his cloak heavy with water, and his gloves stiff from holding the reins. Yet there was no faltering in his movements. Each step forward, each careful adjustment, was deliberate and controlled. He had learned to synchronize with his horse, to anticipate shifts in the slippery ground, and to remain calm despite the gusts of wind and splashes of water. The parade had become more than punishment. It had become a lesson in patience, precision, and courage. The Royal Guard flanked him with unwavering discipline, their movements synchronized even as the streets turned slick with rainwater. Their faces, though stern, carried a quiet sense of pride in maintaining formation and ensuring the parade ended safely. The horse guards adjusted their mounts subtly, responding to the officer's small corrections and keeping the procession steady. It was a careful choreography, a dance of endurance and coordination that highlighted the strength and skill of all involved. The crowd lining the palace gates watched in silence as the parade approached its final moments. Some faces showed respect for the officer's composure, others admiration for the discipline of the guards, and a few reflected quiet reflection on the nature of punishment and resilience. The city, soaked in gray, seemed to acknowledge the endurance displayed, the story of courage unfolding under the storm. Children pointed, adults whispered, and the sound of hooves striking wet cobblestones created a rhythm that matched the pulse of the gathered spectators. The officer's horse stepped carefully through the final stretch, muscles straining but steady. He leaned forward slightly, signaling the horse to maintain balance, and felt the subtle acknowledgement of its trust. The royal guard and horse guards maintained their positions, ensuring that the formation remained intact and dignified. The officer's head was held high, his eyes forward, projecting calm and strength despite exhaustion and wet clothing. Every detail of posture, movement, and expression was deliberate, a silent testament to his endurance and discipline. As the gates of the palace drew near, the officer allowed himself a small measure of reflection. The punishment parade had been more than a display of authority and correction. It had been a test of resilience, a demonstration of courage, and a reminder of the strength inherent in endurance. The city had watched, judged, and silently acknowledged the effort, and he had carried himself with dignity through the storm. Though physically drained, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, an understanding that he had not merely survived the punishment, but had risen to meet it with composure. The final moments of the parade were carefully orchestrated. The officer guided his horse through the gates, following the precise instructions of the royal guard. The horse guards flanked him until the very last step, ensuring order and discipline until the end. The streets, now reflecting the gray sky and fading rain, seemed to hold a quiet reverence for the completion of the procession. The officer dismounted slowly, his legs stiff from hours in the saddle, and took a deep breath, feeling the relief of completing the ordeal. The crowd began to disperse slowly, some lingering to comment on the parade, others retreating to dry clothes and warm homes. Conversations buzzed with admiration for the officer's endurance and the remarkable discipline of the guards. Children excitedly recounted the horses and the shiny armor, while adults reflected on the quiet lessons of courage and resilience displayed. The officer, now on foot, walked beside his horse, the reins in hand, acknowledging the subtle nods of respect from those who had observed. Inside the palace grounds, the officer and the guards returned to their quarters. The stables smelled of wet hay and animals, and the warmth of the building contrasted sharply with the cold, rainy streets outside. The royal guard and horse guards dismounted, their movements precise despite fatigue. The officer paused for a moment, looking at his horse, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. The animal had carried him through not just the physical challenges of the parade, but also the emotional weight of public scrutiny and punishment. The day had been long, difficult, and humbling, yet the officer understood that it had also been transformative. He had endured the storm, the scrutiny, and the challenge of maintaining composure under extreme conditions. He had learned lessons of resilience, patience, and the quiet power of dignity. The parade meant to punish had also revealed strength, not just his own, but that of the guards, the horses, and even the city that had witnessed the event. As evening settled over London, the rain faded into a gentle drizzle, leaving the streets reflective and quiet. The officer sat by the stable, letting the warmth seep into his soaked clothes, and reflected on the day's events. Though he had faced public punishment, he had done so with courage and control. The royal guard and horse guards rested nearby, their own discipline giving them a sense of fulfillment after a day of rigorous demonstration. The city had seen a story unfold, a story of endurance, resilience, and the subtle triumph of dignity over adversity. The officer knew that the punishment parade would be remembered not only for the reason he had been punished, but also for the strength, courage, and calm he had shown in facing it. The storm had tested him, the crowd had watched him, and the guards had maintained their unbroken discipline. Yet through it all, he had endured, demonstrating that true strength is often revealed not in moments of triumph, but in moments of hardship. And as the rain faded and the evening sky darkened, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, a knowledge that he had faced adversity with honor, and that this day, soaked and challenging as it had become a testament to the resilience of human spirit.